There's a specific kind of coldness you feel when you realize you're on the outside looking in, not through a window at home, but through the glass wall of a conference room at the company you've poured your life into. Inside, my team was celebrating. I could see the catered sandwiches, the bottles of champagne, the easy laughter. My manager, Mark, saw me standing there. He met my eyes for a fraction of a second, his lips curling into a faint smirk before he deliberately turned his back to me. This was the annual bonus meeting, and I was the only one on my team who wasn't invited. So if you're watching this right now, maybe in your car, maybe on your lunch break, just tell me one thing. Where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels, and if something in you recognizes something in this, stay with me. My name is Sarah Jennings, and for 3 years, I had been a senior marketing strategist at Digital Edge, or at least that was my official title. I joined the company when it was still a beacon of innovation in the heart of Chicago, a place where creativity wasn't just encouraged, it was the primary currency. The interview process itself had been a marathon, 4 separate rounds, a full strategy presentation that I spent a week perfecting, and a final exhilarating meeting with the chief executive officer himself. When the offer letter finally arrived, I felt like my entire professional life had been leading to that single moment. It wasn't just a job, it was my arrival. It was the validation of years of relentless hard work and a master's degree from a university that had cost me more than I cared to admit. The first 2 years were an absolute dream, largely thanks to my manager, Melissa. She was a brilliant, transparent leader who fostered a genuine sense of collaboration. She believed that a rising tide lifts all boats, and she lived by that mantra. It was under her mentorship that I truly found my footing. I remember working with her on the Westfield Industries pitch. They were the white whale the firm had been pursuing for almost a decade. Melissa didn't just assign me tasks. She brought me into the core strategy sessions, valued my insights, and gave me the autonomy to build the final presentation from the ground up. When we won the account, she made sure everyone, from the partners down to the interns, knew that my strategy was the key that had unlocked the door. That win alone exceeded our team's annual projections by nearly 50% and earned us a glowing feature in a major industry publication. That was the digital edge I had fallen in love with. Then, about 10 months ago, the tide began to turn. Melissa left to start her own agency, and her replacement, Mark Bennett, walked in. From the very first day, the air in the office grew heavier, the open flow of information constricting into carefully controlled channels. Where Melissa had built a round table, Mark constructed a pyramid with himself firmly at the top. He quickly established what became known around the office in hushed whispers as his inner circle. There was Nathan, an account executive with more confidence than competence, who transformed into Mark's weekend golfing partner and office shadow. And there was Jessica, our ambitious social media specialist, who mastered the art of praising Mark's most mediocre ideas as strokes of unparalleled genius. The warning signs were subtle at first, a series of small paper-cut slights that you tell yourself are just your imagination. An idea I'd present in a Monday meeting would be met with a non-committal shrug from Mark, only to be passionately reintroduced by Nathan on a Wednesday, framed as a brilliant spark of insight he'd had while discussing strategy with Mark. Then came the emails. A critical thread discussing a shift in project direction would be forwarded to the whole team, but my name, inexplicably, would be missing from the recipient list. I remember one specific incident that felt like a deliberate turning point. I had spent 2 weeks developing a comprehensive launch plan for a new client, working late into the night. Chloe, my friend in the design department, had even created a stunning set of custom graphics just for my presentation. The day before the meeting, an updated schedule was sent out. My name had been removed as the presenter. Nathan was now listed. I watched him the next day, clicking through my slides, stumbling over the key data points that I knew by heart. He got the credit. I got a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was after that incident that Chloe pulled me aside for coffee. Her expression was serious, her usual playful energy gone. "Sarah, this isn't in your head," she said, her voice low. "I see the project briefs. I see your name being taken off deliverables at the last minute. He's deliberately sidelining you, making you invisible. You need to start documenting everything. Every email, every report, every single win. Create your own private record because I promise you, the official one is being rewritten. I wish I could say I listened to her immediately. A part of me, the part that still clung to the memory of Melissa's meritocracy, just couldn't accept it. I believed my work was its own defense, that excellence was a shield. So I politely dismissed her concerns, reassuring myself that this was just a clash of professional styles. Instead of building an archive, I doubled down on my work. I became relentless, staying later, taking on the most challenging assignments, determined to deliver results so massive they simply couldn't be ignored or reattributed. That's how I ended up leading the charge to secure Pinnacle Systems, which became our largest new client of the year. The project was a nightmare of logistical and technical challenges that had scared off two other teams. I spent a month untangling it, developing a proprietary analytics approach that not only won them over, but also reduced our firm's overall reporting time by a third. It was a monumental win, and in our next team meeting, Mark acknowledged it with a brief, "Good work on that team," before spending 10 minutes praising Jessica for a minor increase in social media engagement. It was later that week that I walked past his office and overheard him on the phone with a senior partner, his voice booming with pride as he detailed how his strategic guidance had been instrumental in landing the Pinnacle account. That was the moment Chloe's warning came rushing back, no longer a friendly piece of advice, but a blaring alarm. That was the day my belief in meritocracy died. The excellence I produced didn't protect me. It had made me a target. My success was a resource to be mined, my achievements a currency for him to spend on himself and his favorites. Which brings me back to this cold, surreal moment, sitting at my desk, the ghost of laughter echoing through the thick glass of the conference room. The humiliation wasn't just about a missed party or a bonus check. It was the public coronation of the false narrative he had been building for months. It was the final, brutal confirmation that in Mark's carefully constructed reality, my contributions, my late nights, my very professional identity had been completely and utterly erased. But as I sat there, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it all, the initial hot sting of shame began to cool and solidify into something else, something hard and clear, like ice. I reached into my bag and pulled out my personal laptop, its surface cool beneath my fingertips. I bypassed the company network entirely, connecting to a private encrypted cloud drive, and I opened the file that I had started building the day after I heard Mark steal my Pinnacle Systems victory. It wasn't just a folder with a few documents. It was my ARC, my digital archive of the truth. I wasn't looking at a random collection of files. I was looking at a meticulously organized chronological narrative of my value. In one section, the original client emails, filled with glowing testimonials and direct praise for my strategies. In another, the unaltered performance dashboards, screenshotted at the end of every week, showing my metrics consistently exceeding targets before they were inevitably adjusted downwards in the official reports Mark submitted. I had the entire project plan for the Westfield account, every slide and strategic decision clearly authored and time-stamped by me. It was a fortress of facts, built to withstand the assault of his fiction. I slowly scrolled through it all, my breathing even, my hands no longer shaking. The feeling of being a victim was evaporating, replaced by the cold, calculated focus of a strategist. I had identified the problem. Now I was simply reviewing the data before choosing the most effective solution. My analysis was complete, the data was clear, presenting a narrative so starkly different from the one being celebrated behind the glass that it felt like it belonged to another reality. The most effective solution wasn't an emotional confrontation, nor was it a desperate formal complaint to the Human Resources Department, which Mark had likely already charmed or intimidated into compliance. The only viable solution was to escalate, but to do so logically, surgically, bypassing the compromised mid-level to reach a part of the company that operated on an entirely different and far more ruthless set of principles. I closed my personal laptop, the soft click of the lid sounding like a gavel falling in the quiet of my own resolve. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the office carpet, and walked away from my desk. I forced myself not to look toward the conference room as I passed. I didn't need to see the catered food or the champagne any longer. I had the image burned into my memory. Instead, I focused on the path ahead, walking with a deliberate calmness I did not feel, toward a small, unused alcove near the fire exit at the far end of the floor. It was a quiet dead zone, a pocket of stillness where conversations wouldn't be overheard. There, I pulled out my personal phone, its screen cool and unfamiliar compared to the company-issued device I'd left on my desk. I scrolled through my contacts to a name I had added 6 months prior, after a particularly insightful quarterly review meeting: Eleanor Vance, the Vice President of Operations. I remembered that meeting clearly. I had presented a data analysis that contradicted a widely held assumption about a key market demographic. My findings were unpopular, suggesting a profitable strategy would have to be abandoned. While other leaders looked uncomfortable, Eleanor had leaned forward, her eyes fixed on my slides. After I finished, she was the only one who spoke, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Thank you for the unflinching honesty of your data, Sarah," she had said. "I'd rather confront an inconvenient truth than invest in a comfortable lie." In that moment, I knew she was the one person in the building who valued raw data over political narrative. She was my only shot. My thumb hovered over her name for a second, a final moment of reckoning. This was the point of no return. I pressed the screen. The phone rang twice, each tone echoing the frantic beat of my own heart before she answered, her voice as crisp and authoritative as I remembered. "Eleanor Vance." I took a breath, forcing a calmness into my own voice, purging any trace of the morning's humiliation. "Good morning, Eleanor. This is Sarah Jennings from the marketing department. I apologize for the direct and unexpected call." There was a brief, loaded pause. I could hear the faint, rhythmic tapping of a keyboard in the background, a signal of her immense workload. "I'm heading into a meeting, Sarah," she said, her tone not unkind but ruthlessly efficient, the sound of a person who viewed her time in seconds and minutes, not pleasantries. "Can this not be routed through Mark or Human Resources?" "Normally, yes," I replied, keeping my own pace measured and respectful. "However, the situation directly concerns company policy on performance-based compensation, and it pertains specifically to the revenue and client stability of both the Westfield and Pinnacle accounts." The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. I had used the keywords, the two names that represented millions of dollars in annual profit, accounts I knew she monitored with an eagle eye. Her voice, when it came back, had been stripped of its dismissive efficiency. It was now sharpened with a focused, almost dangerous interest. "A bonus distribution? For those accounts, my understanding was that the executive committee approved the bonus pool, but the distribution wasn't scheduled until the end of the fiscal quarter." Her words were like a searchlight cutting through fog, confirming my deepest suspicions. He hadn't just excluded me. He had gone rogue, manipulating the entire corporate timeline to suit his own agenda. "That was my understanding as well," I said, my voice a steady anchor in a swirling sea of adrenaline. "However, a bonus and promotion distribution meeting is taking place at this very moment in the main conference room. I was explicitly excluded by Mark, who informed me it was for top performers only. This is despite my performance metrics consistently exceeding targets, and my direct documented role as the lead strategist in securing both of those keystone clients." I let a beat of silence hang in the air, allowing the sheer audacity of the facts to land. "I see," Eleanor said. The two simple words were heavy with implication, carrying a weight that 1,000 emotional words could never achieve. "Do you have documentation to support your performance claims?" "I do," I said simply. "A complete time-stamped archive, including client testimonials, original project data, and unaltered performance analytics." The line was quiet for a long moment. It felt like an eternity. I imagined her weighing the variables, the disruption I was causing versus the potential liability of a rogue manager, and the risk to two major accounts. I had made my move. Now she was calculating hers. "Email me everything you have, Sarah," she finally said, her voice now devoid of any warmth but ringing with cold authority. "I will review it personally. Do not speak of this to anyone else." The call ended. She hadn't promised to fix it. She hadn't offered a word of sympathy. She had simply requested the data. It was the most professional and the most promising response I could have ever hoped for. I walked back to my desk, the short journey feeling like a mile-long trek across enemy territory. I could feel the peripheral gaze of my colleagues, those not invited to the party, their curiosity a palpable force in the air. They were pretending to work, but I knew they were watching the drama unfold. I sat down, opened a work document, and stared at the words on the screen, my mind a whirlwind. I had just leapfrogged my direct superior and the entire human resources department. I had presented a case of high-level managerial misconduct to one of the most powerful people in the company. I had pulled the pin on a grenade, and now all I could do was sit and wait in the deafening silence, unsure if it would blow up in his face or my own. The minutes on my computer screen ticked by with agonizing slowness. 10 minutes, 20, 25. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to creep in. Had I miscalculated her reaction? Was Eleanor at this very moment forwarding my insubordinate email right back down the chain of command as a brutal lesson in corporate protocol? I pictured Mark receiving it, a triumphant sneer on his face. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Through the glass, I could see Nathan roaring with laughter at something Mark had said, while Jessica artfully angled her phone to capture a selfie with her champagne flute. The soundless celebration felt like a personal mockery of my desperate, silent gamble. Then, at exactly the 30-minute mark after my call with Eleanor had ended, the first ripple appeared in their perfect pond. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a subtle vibration on the large oak table. I saw Mark's gaze flicker down to his phone. His performative, jovial expression faltered. He picked it up, his smile vanishing as he listened, his head tilting slightly. His posture, once broad and confident, seemed to deflate in real time, his shoulders slumping just a fraction. He wasn't speaking, only nodding stiffly, his face losing its healthy color. He ended the call, placing the phone back on the table with a hand that was not quite steady, and his eyes shot across the room. They bypassed the laughing faces of his favorites and locked directly onto mine. The look was no longer one of smug dismissal. It was a volatile, toxic mixture of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning venomous anger. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew I had done something. He stood up abruptly, mumbled a single curt sentence to the group, and walked out of the conference room alone, leaving a wake of bewildered silence behind him. The team members inside exchanged confused glances, their party-like atmosphere instantly evaporating into tense uncertainty. He didn't come back. Instead, the heavy oak door to the Human Resources suite swung open, and Martin Reeves, the director, stepped out. Martin was a man who seemed to be made of gray, a gray suit, graying hair, and a perpetually gray, non-committal expression. He was the company's quiet undertaker, the man who handled messy situations with silent, permanent efficiency. He didn't even glance towards the confused group in the conference room. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the open-plan office, and began to walk slowly, deliberately, his footsteps making no sound, straight for my desk. The hum of the office seemed to fade into a dull roar in my ears as I watched Martin Reeves approach. Every footstep was a silent, deliberate beat in a funeral march, and I knew instinctively who was being led to the gallows. He stopped in front of my desk, his presence casting a long shadow over my workspace. A few colleagues nearby, who had been pretending to work, suddenly found their screens intensely interesting. The air grew thick and still. "Sarah," he said, his voice perfectly even, betraying no emotion. "Do you have a moment? I'd like to have a brief chat. Let's use one of the smaller meeting rooms, shall we?" It wasn't a question. It was a summons. His tone was disarmingly pleasant, but it was the sterile pleasantness of a doctor about to deliver bad news. I simply nodded, gathered my tablet out of reflex, and stood up, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I followed his gray suit down the hallway, feeling the weight of dozens of unseen eyes on my back. He led me to a small, windowless room on the interior of the floor, a space usually reserved for quick, informal calls. It felt less like a meeting room and more like an interrogation box. The air was stale and recycled. He closed the door behind us, the soft click echoing loudly in the small space, and gestured for me to sit. He sat opposite me, placing nothing on the table between us. He steepled his fingers, a gesture of calm authority, and looked at me with an unreadable expression. He didn't mention the bonus meeting. He didn't mention Mark or Eleanor or my phone call. He began with a slow, circling approach. "We've been hearing some chatter about the department's morale lately, Sarah," he started, his voice a soft, confidential murmur. "There's a sense that things have been challenging since the leadership transition." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air, inviting me to agree, to complain. I remained silent, my expression neutral. When I didn't take the bait, he shifted his angle. "Mark mentioned in passing," he continued, his tone still casual, "that there have been some difficulties with team integration. He feels you've had some trouble aligning with the group's highly collaborative direction. Could you share your perspective on that?" And there it was. The trap. It was perfectly executed. He wasn't asking me about my exclusion or Mark's behavior. He was putting me on the defensive, forcing me to respond to a carefully crafted narrative in which I was the problem, the difficult, non-collaborative employee. I felt a flash of heat rise in my chest, but I pushed it down, converting the anger into ice-cold precision. I would not get emotional. I would not fall into his trap. "My perspective," I said, my voice as steady as his, "is that collaboration is most effective when it is centered on accurate data and focused on client outcomes. My performance reviews and the results of my projects, particularly the Westfield and Pinnacle accounts, have consistently reflected an exemplary level of successful collaboration with both internal teams and our clients." I had refused his premise, answered his question, and restated my value, all without raising my voice. He listened, his head tilted slightly. It was in that moment that I noticed something that made the hairs on my arm stand up. He was taking notes, not on a company-issued laptop or a branded notepad, but on a plain, unmarked yellow legal pad with a silver personal pen. This wasn't an official human resources meeting that would be logged and filed. This was off the books. This was a conversation the company wanted to be able to deny ever happened. This was serious. He made a final note, the scratch of his pen unnervingly loud. He then looked up, the pretense of a friendly chat falling away to reveal the cold, corporate machinery beneath. "Thank you for your candor, Sarah," he said, the words feeling like a dismissal. He stood up. "Just for protocol, our information technology team will be running a standard data integrity audit on the marketing department's servers tonight. I'd advise logging off for the evening to avoid any disruption." He smiled. It was a thin, bloodless smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Have a good evening." It wasn't a pleasantry. It was a threat, wrapped in the sterile language of corporate procedure. That night at home, the weight of that threat became a reality. I had a habit of logging in for 30 minutes before bed just to review the next day's schedule and check the automated dashboards I had built for our key clients. It was a habit born of diligence and a desire to always be prepared. I opened my laptop, entered my credentials, and pressed enter. A small red box appeared on the screen. Access denied. I tried again, thinking I had made a typo. Access denied. The data integrity audit wasn't a technical procedure. It was a digital guillotine. They had severed me from the system. They were methodically, quietly erasing me. A cold, sinking feeling washed over me. This was how it happened, not with a dramatic firing, but with a silent digital lockout. Just as I was processing the full, chilling implication of this, my personal phone began to ring, its cheerful tone a jarring contrast to the cold dread filling the room. The number was unfamiliar. I answered cautiously, my voice a little hoarse. "Hello? Sarah? Thank God." The voice on the other end was frantic, filled with a panic that was instantly contagious. It took me a second to place it. It was John, the lead systems engineer from Westfield Industries, our largest and most important client. "John, what's wrong? It's late." "I'm so sorry to call you at home, but we have a major problem," he said, speaking quickly. "The automated reporting dashboard you built for us, the one that feeds directly to our executive board, it's frozen. It's not pulling any new data from the last 12 hours. We have a board presentation at 9 in the morning and our entire progress report is blind. All our key metrics are gone." My blood ran cold. I knew that system better than I knew my own apartment. I had designed every part of it. "What did my replacement say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. John let out a short, frustrated laugh. "Mark's new guy, Nathan, he has no idea what he's looking at. He kept talking about rebooting the synergy and asked if we'd tried turning the cloud off and on again. Sarah, we are in serious trouble here. The image of Nathan, clueless and arrogant, trying to handle a system of that complexity was almost comical, but the reality of the situation was anything but. My attempt to protect my position had led to this. The company's attempt to contain me, to quietly push me out, had just backfired in the most spectacular way possible. They had tried to solve an internal human resources problem, and in doing so had created a massive, external, client-facing crisis. Can you just log in and fix it?" John asked, his voice pleading. "I don't know what you do, but it always just worked when you were managing it. It would take you 5 minutes." I closed my eyes, the full weight of the situation pressing down on me. I took a slow, deep breath and delivered the line that I knew would change everything. "I'm sorry, John," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I can't. My own company has locked me out of my account." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a profound, damning silence that was more powerful than any shouting match could ever be. It was the sound of a multi-million-dollar account's trust cracking. And I knew, in that moment, that the grenade I had pulled the pin on hours earlier had finally, definitively, exploded. The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute, a profound, damning vacuum that was more powerful than any shouting match could ever be. I knew in that moment that the grenade I had pulled the pin on hours earlier had finally, definitively exploded. I didn't sleep that night, left in a state of digital exile, waiting for the fallout. The next morning, the storm made landfall. A single encrypted message from Chloe cut through my suspense. The president of Westfield Industries had called Eleanor Vance directly, furious. The internal human resources problem I had reported had just exploded into a C-level client crisis, triggered by the system failure my lockout had caused. The investigation, she added, had widened. They were now pulling all of Mark's financial records. He had tried to erase me, and in doing so, had put his entire career under a microscope. Late that afternoon, a courier delivered a stiff, formal envelope to my door. It was from a downtown law firm whose name sounded powerful and expensive. The letter inside was brief and devoid of emotion, stating that my presence was required for a formal meeting. They weren't inviting me for a chat. They were scheduling a deposition. The law firm's conference room was the physical embodiment of corporate power. I sat alone on one side of a vast, polished table. On the other side sat Eleanor and Martin from Human Resources, now flanked by two stone-faced lawyers who introduced themselves as the company's external counsel. The adversarial atmosphere was thick enough to taste. The lead counsel, a woman with sharp eyes, began by trying to frame me as a disgruntled employee. "Miss Jennings," she started, her voice polite but edged with steel, "could you walk us through your feelings of dissatisfaction that led you to bypass the normal chain of command?" I refused to take the emotional bait. "My feelings are irrelevant," I stated, my voice calm and even. "I contacted Miss Vance to report a significant discrepancy between my documented performance and a compensation decision, which represented a potential breach of established company policy." I had pulled the conversation out of the realm of emotion and placed it firmly in the world of facts and procedure. After nearly an hour of their attempts to find inconsistencies, I decided to take control. Perhaps it would be more efficient if I showed you the data myself. Before they could object, I opened my personal laptop and projected my digital archive onto the large monitor at the end of the room. I was no longer a witness. I was a presenter. I walked them through my work, the client emails, the unaltered performance dashboards, and the official reports Mark had submitted where my numbers were consistently diminished. The male lawyer attempted one last weak rebuttal. "This data is compelling, but some of it could be subject to managerial interpretation." "And then there is this," I said, opening the final file. It was a screenshot of an internal message from Mark to Nathan sent 2 days before the bonus meeting, attached to a draft of the performance report. Mark's words were there, in black and white for everyone to see. "Nathan, let's adjust these numbers down for Sarah before the final submission. We need to manage the narrative here." It was the smoking gun, a deliberate, premeditated intent to manipulate corporate data. I saw the two lawyers exchange a microscopic, almost imperceptible glance. In that split second, their entire strategy crumbled. Their case against me had evaporated. After a few more perfunctory questions, the deposition was concluded. The lawyers left with Martin, their professional masks firmly in place. Only Eleanor remained. She gestured for me to stay seated. The adversarial tension was gone, replaced by a cold, hard pragmatism. She looked at me, not with sympathy, but with the clear-eyed appraisal of a strategist assessing a valuable asset. She didn't apologize. She simply asked the one question that told me everything. If Mark were no longer with the company, she said, her voice quiet and direct, what exactly would it take to fix the Westfield account? My answer to Eleanor wasn't about personal gain. I laid out a strategic plan to fix the client relationship, a plan that logically required my complete authority over the project. She simply nodded, a flicker of what might have been respect in her eyes, and said, I understand. The next 48 hours were a blur of quiet, decisive action. A sterile, company-wide email announced that Mark Bennett was no longer with the company, effective immediately. He was simply erased. Shortly after, my own company access was restored. The first email I saw was a formal offer from Eleanor. It contained a new title, Senior Marketing Strategist, a salary that exceeded my expectations, and the full bonus I had been denied. It was a clear attempt to make things right, but it came with a price. The final sentence read, "This offer is contingent upon your signing of the attached standard, non-disclosure, and non-disparagement agreement." They were offering me a golden cage, demanding my silence in exchange for my victory. The old Sarah would have signed it gratefully, but I was no longer that person. I forwarded the entire package to my own lawyer. A day later, the company's counsel received our response. I had agreed to protect their trade secrets, but with a single bold red line, I had struck out the entire non-disparagement clause. My truth was not for sale. Faced with the risk of a public scandal and the need to stabilize their largest account, the company conceded. Their one-sentence reply to my lawyer was simple: the terms are acceptable. Weeks later, the scene from the beginning of this ordeal replayed itself, but the reality had been inverted. I was back in the same glass-walled conference room, at the same large oak table, but this time I was sitting at the head of it, leading the strategy meeting. The team looked to me for direction, their respect earned not through politics, but through proven competence. They had thought the problem was one man's ego. They never understood that I wasn't fighting for a bonus check. I was fighting for the simple, fundamental truth that good work demands to be seen, that reality cannot and should not be erased. And in the productive quiet of that room, surrounded by my team, that truth was finally, deafeningly clear. My journey taught me that the most powerful response isn't always a loud argument, but often the quiet presentation of an irrefutable fact. Your value is not determined by someone else's opinion. It is measured by the quality of your work and the integrity of your character. If you have ever felt invisible in a room where you deserved a seat at the table, or had to build your own archive of the truth just to be heard, know that you are not alone. If this story spoke to you, comment and share it with someone who's still finding their own voice.